So welcome to the Dixon's virtual Munch and Learn. I'm really glad you're here. And please take the time, if you haven't already, to mute yourself. And I want to let you know that we are recording this presentation and it will be added to our YouTube channel. And you can find the videos and art and horticulture activities at dixon.org on the Dixon at Home page. And during the talk, when a question pops into your head, go ahead and click on the chat button at the bottom of the screen and type in your question, and there will be time for Josh to answer questions in the end. So Joshua Mugler is the curator of Islamic Manuscripts at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. He completed his PhD in Theological and Religious Studies at Georgetown University in 2019, focusing on Christian-Muslim relations in medieval Syria. And his work at HMML he has cataloged many manuscripts produced by both Christians and Muslims throughout the Middle East. He's a native of St. Louis, and he now lives in Minneapolis with his spouse and his cat. So I'll send it over to Joshua.
Great, thank you so much. Please, Lindley or someone, let me know if my sound is too quiet or if there's any other issues. But I'm really glad to be able to join you all today for this event. I hope I think it promises to be a good discussion. And yeah, I will plan to talk for a while, somewhere around 45 minutes maybe, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. So yeah, I'm very excited about this. So let's get started. As Lindley said, my name is Joshua Mugler. I'm the curator of Islamic Manuscripts at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. And I want to start by just talking about kind of the title image and the title that I have here. The image that I have over here is a combination of two manuscripts, two images. One of them is on the bottom here is from the St. John's Bible, and as most of you probably know, that's the exhibition that this talk is connected to, and I hope many of you were able to attend Tim Turnist's presentation a few weeks ago when he discussed the St. John's Bible and all the various ins and outs of the ways that it was produced and the thoughts that went into it. So what we have here on the right is an image from the beginning of the Gospel of John from the St. John Bible. You can see the text here, and lived among us. That's from the first chapter of John, and kind of referring to the incarnation. And then you can see some of the gold here is actually the body of Jesus. And then the second manuscript here is actually a manuscript that we have here in our collections at Himmel in Minnesota, which is a fragment of a Quran from a few centuries back, not exactly clear when, because it's only a couple pages, possibly made in South Asia or something like that. But the reason that I have this image is because it's very common in discussions of kind of Muslim and Christian theology that people will say that for Muslims, the actual kind of equivalent to what Christians would, when Christians think about Jesus as kind of the Word of God who became flesh, for Muslims, really the word is actually kind of the words of the Quran. And so the actual kind of object of the words take on a really important significance, and that really shows itself not only in the manuscript tradition, but also in all sorts of Islamic art, which I'll have some occasion to discuss as we go on here. And this image is not only beautiful, but it's also especially relevant because the text here is actually from the beginning of the surah or chapter of the Quran that is about Mary. And this text here is Zechariah, who Muslims consider a prophet, and who is the father of John the Baptist, who Muslims also consider a prophet. And so this is Zechariah praying for a child, and this is something that would be familiar for Christians from the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. And then shortly after this, we have Mary being visited by the angel Gabriel and promised a son, which then leads into the birth of Jesus Christ. And I have the title here, "Taught by the Pen," which is also a quote from the Quran, and it's actually from the passage that's considered to be the very, very first thing that was revealed from the Quran to Muhammad. So as the story goes, around the year 610 on Christian calendar, there was a man named Muhammad who lived in Mecca. He was a merchant, a businessman, but he would regularly go into this cave outside the town to kind of spend some time alone praying and meditating. And so on one of these occasions, the angel Gabriel came to him, and Gabriel also you would recognize as a character from the books of Luke and Daniel in the Christian and Hebrew Bible. So the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and said the word Iqra in Arabic, which means read or recite. And Muhammad said, well, I can't actually read. And so then Gabriel kind of told him what to recite, and it was the first words of what would eventually become the Quran. And he said, recite, in the name of your Lord who created humanity from a clinging thing. Recite, your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught humanity what they did not know. And that's the beginning of chapter 96 of the Quran, and it's considered to be the very first text that was revealed to him. So you have in this passage, right from the very beginning, this emphasis on reading and writing, on the word. You can take it metaphorically, maybe, as the pen representing God's kind of teaching or control of creation, or you can take it literally as a reference to human knowledge, spread through books, that people actually learn things by writing that they wouldn't know otherwise. So you've got many ways to interpret it, but this real emphasis on the importance of the word and on writing really, I think, is something that you'll see throughout this kind of tour of the art that we're going to see today. So before we get into more details on all of that, I just want to say a little bit about what is Himmel, so that you can get a sense of why I'm in this position and what I'm doing. And then I'll have kind of a brief introduction to Islam for people who may not know about it very much. And then we'll really get into the manuscript details after that. So Himmel is located at St. John's University in rural Minnesota. There's a Benedictine abbey here, so there are monks that live on campus, and then there's the university built around it. And the project that would eventually become Himmel was founded in 1964. And basically the origins of it are that the monks here were concerned that there was the potential of a World War III happening in Europe that would wipe out, among other things, a lot of the cultural heritage of Benedictine monasteries there and other repositories of books and manuscripts. There had already been a lot of destruction in World War II, many things destroyed in Germany and other places. And so they thought that there might be value in going to Europe and making copies of the manuscripts that people had there so that they would be preserved in another place in case there was some huge, nuclear war or something like that. And they had heard there was a similar project that St. Louis University had done not that long before, where they made copies of a lot of the Vatican Library's manuscripts on microfilm. And so some of the monks came up with this project, and they had some stops and starts at the beginning. There was some opposition from some of the monasteries over there, but eventually they got started in Austria around 1965 and made microfilm copies of many, many thousands of manuscripts from all over Western Europe. And so those microfilms are still here in the library, and they're available for people to do research on. And eventually they got involved beyond Western Europe. They moved into Ethiopia in the around the 80s. But then the really big transition was in 2003 when our current director, Columbus Stewart, took over the organization. And at the same time, we not only moved into the Middle East for the first time, but also transitioned to digital images. And so now we have, this is a picture of inside the library now. There are rooms on the left that people can do research in. There are all sorts of reference works. But now we have many, many, many thousands of manuscripts that are digitized, that are available online for free to anyone who just creates an account. So we still have a lot of microfilms that you have to come to campus or pay a fee to see them, but we also have many digital images. Most of what I'll be showing you today will be manuscripts that we have digital images from, and so I just got these all from our own collections, but hopefully they'll illustrate a lot of the points that I'm trying to make. And then to just give you a brief introduction to what is Islam. Basically the story, I kind of briefly mentioned it before, but there was this man named Muhammad who lived in the city of Mecca, which is the city on the right in this image here. And around 610, he began to have these revelations where he would recite these texts to the people. He was a merchant, he was a trader. He would often go on journeys kind of up the Arabian Peninsula and into Syria, and he would interact with Christians and Jews, and it was a very diverse population within Mecca and also in the places that he would travel and trade. And he began to be very dissatisfied with kind of the social structure, the injustices of kind of the groups that were dominating Mecca and parts of Arabia at that time. And so he started to preach these revelations that were calling for repentance, calling for change and sort of reordering society, more just way, calling for people to change their personal lives and also the way that the society was built around them. And so the Quran, the text that we now have as the Quran, includes these calls to repentance. It also includes various laws for society. It includes many stories, including stories about characters that would be very recognizable to Jews and Christians, biblical characters. Many of the important characters that are found in the Bible, you can find their stories in the Quran as well, sort of comments on their stories. You can find kind of new interpretations sometimes, new takes on stories, new ways of telling them. But it is many of the same characters, and many of the stories are very recognizable. And in fact, you can tell from the Quran that the text is in conversation with many, many Jews and Christians living around, and also people who have just heard those stories and are interested in what they might mean for them. And then there are also other stories that come from Arabian traditions, Arabian history and legends, and those might not be as recognizable, but you can see some of the same themes that come up. And around 622, Muhammad had been preaching this for 12 years and was getting a lot of opposition from the powerful people in Mecca, a lot of kind of suppression of his message and his followers, various sorts of persecution. And in 622, the people of Medina, which is the city on the left in this image, were having a dispute, and they decided that they needed kind of an outside person to come in and take over and kind of create more of a just society that would balance between the different parties and wouldn't be like from one or the other group. And so they asked Muhammad to come and actually be their leader, their ruler in Medina. And so Muhammad and most of his followers ended up leaving and going to Medina. And so that became kind of the first actual Muslim society that was governed by the laws revealed in the Quran and that sort of thing. And so that's when a lot of the laws actually started to be revealed to deal with situations that were going on there. And so that migration from Mecca to Medina is actually the date that the Islamic calendar begins. So right now it's the year 1440 or something ish. And that actually is dated from this event when Muhammad and his followers moved from Mecca to Medina and established the Islamic society there for the first time. So over the course of the rest of his life, the last 10 years of his life, he continued to lead there, but also continued to kind of come into conflict with the leaders of Mecca who were opposed to his message. And so there were various battles, and by the end of it, he had taken over Mecca as well, and kind of established it as the focal point of Muslim devotion. So this building that you can see on the right here, this black cube here is called the Kaaba, and that's in Mecca, and that's the place that Muslims still pray towards every day, and they go on pilgrimage there, ideally at least once in their lifetime if they can. So that was already there before the Prophet was preaching, but he kind of reimagined it and reestablished it as the center of Islamic faith. So so that's kind of the basic story of how it began. But then it very quickly, within 100 years of the Prophet's death, Muslims were living in and ruling places from southern France all the way to Central and South Asia, what's now places like Pakistan and India and Kyrgyzstan. I mean, an incredible diversity of territory and cultures. And so you really, from the very beginning, have this incredibly rich and diverse cultural and artistic heritage that becomes part of the Islamic tradition. There's various styles and influences that come from all of these cultures that I think you'll see throughout the presentation. So to talk about the manuscripts then, what are the earliest manuscripts? If you were able to attend Tim's talk, then I'm sure you heard a lot about parchment specifically, which is the material that the St. John's Bible is made from, and is kind of the manuscript material par excellence in Western Europe throughout the medieval period, and was the standard at the time of Muhammad and his followers. And so the very earliest things that you start to get are mostly manuscripts of the Quran written on parchment, which is made from animal skins, usually calf skins or sheepskin. So here's an example of a parchment manuscript. It's part of the Quran. This is actually called the Birmingham Quran. It's at the University of Birmingham in England. And it is likely the oldest Quran manuscript in existence today. It seems to date from the mid 7th century. So very, very soon after the Prophet's death, this manuscript was likely produced. And so it's a very sort of basic script, efficient and that sort of thing. But this is really like where the manuscript tradition began, and you'll see some of the development as we go on. But then there's also papyrus, which you can see here, and you can probably guess if you know anything about papyrus. This was very common in Egypt specifically. And this papyrus here, papyrus is made from the reeds of the papyrus plant that grows by the Nile. This one here is actually dated. It's dated in both, it has Greek at the top and it has Arabic at the bottom. And it's dated to the year 643. and it's a tax receipt. So papyrus, the papyrus that survives is generally sort of small documentary things like that, things like receipts, things like bills, various notes that might sort of just be kept around, proof that someone had paid their taxes or done whatever else, bought a certain amount of sheep. So it tends to be more like that and less like big texts like the Quran. But we do have a number of these early papyrus, especially from Egypt, that really preserve incredibly valuable information about the daily life of people in Egypt, but are really quite different from this sort of large-scale manuscript tradition that we're going to see throughout the rest of the talk. But you do have, as time goes on, you have parchment Qurans that start to get a lot more sort of monumental and ornate. So this is one, this is probably from about the 9th century, maybe from North Africa. And it's another Quran, but you can see that the text is much, much larger. It's fancier, the ink is gold, there are multiple colors, and there is decoration, a border around the title of the surah, and also a sort of floral motif on the right. So for one thing, you can probably guess that this would be much more expensive than the Birmingham Quran that's at the top there. It's more parchment, it's more ink of more colors, and it takes much more time to produce. So once you get sort of a more powerful and wealthy society, you can start to afford to produce more decorative stuff like this. But really, the big change here is paper. Paper was introduced from China to Central Asia around the 8th century, and it is considerably cheaper than parchment. It's made from wood fibers, and the combination of this cheaper new material with the wealth of this early Islamic empire meant that there was a massive boom in book production. It was just much cheaper to produce a book than it ever had been before. This is not entirely dependent on paper. It took some time for paper to spread. So for example, in Muslim-ruled Spain and Portugal, what's now Spain and Portugal, you have parchment much later there, like in the rest of Europe, but there was still kind of being scholarship there as well. And of course, it would still be much more expensive to produce a book in this context than it would be after like the printing press and the Industrial Revolution, sort of thing. We're not talking about the sort of mass book culture that appears in modern Europe and contemporary United States, that sort of thing. But it's still a major change that led to a huge boom in the availability of books, the production of books. And so, people with some level of wealth were able to own and produce far more books than they could possibly have done before. And this was part of and also contributed to a larger scholarly environment where there was a boom in translations, there was a boom in composition of new texts, all sorts of forms of scholarly production. And the availability of books at this level of cost was really a huge part of that. So in this context, you've got tons of books from the ancient world being translated into Arabic. This is called the translation movement. And especially in Baghdad around the 9th century or so, there were lots of ancient philosophy and medical texts, books by people like Aristotle and Plato, all these really famous authors, Hippocrates, Galen, ancient authors. Many of them were being translated into Arabic. The wealthy and the rulers were sponsoring translations all over the place. Many of the translators, in fact, were Christians from the local churches of that area who knew either Greek to translate directly from Greek, or in many cases they knew Syriac and the Syriac language, and so it was easier from Syriac to go into Arabic then. But the vast majority of the translators were Christians from that part of the world. Are you? Yeah, you can hear me, I guess. Yeah, it says my internet connection is not great, but hopefully it lasts. So you've got this massive boom in translations. Many of these texts that are translated then eventually make their way back into Latin in the later medieval period, and so they become standard works in Western Europe for many centuries, and not only translations but also original works by Muslim authors like famous people like Avicenna or Averroes. Their works became really famous in Western Europe later on. But the most famous translator of all was named Hunayn ibn Ishaq, and he lived in Baghdad in the 9th century, and he was so valued actually for his translation work that the story is that he would be paid the weight of each book in gold that he would produce. So whenever he translated something, they would weigh the book and then give him the amount of gold that the book weighed. And so there's a later author who says that, I've actually seen manuscripts in Hunayn's own hand, books that he copied himself. And the reason that they've survived, this author is like 500 years later. So he says the reason that they've survived so long is because Hunayn would get very thick, sturdy paper and write with very big letters. And the reason is that he would get more gold that way because they would weigh more. So there was really just a ton of money and effort being poured into sort of the scholarly world at this time. So let's go on to talk about kind of some of the decoration on these manuscripts. You've got calligraphy, very popular. You can see the top left image here is from North Africa, and there's just an incredibly intricate red text going on here. It actually kind of surprisingly readable for a lot of calligraphy. But then you've got at the bottom center here, this is maybe from like Egypt or Syria. And then this decoration with calligraphy, it really just places the emphasis directly on the word as art. And this goes right back to what we were talking about with the importance of the word and the written word and the pen, coming like directly from the Quran itself and also from the earliest revelation of the Quran. So this is popular in manuscripts. It's also very popular in mosques. You can see the mosque decoration at the bottom left here. This mosque is in Uzbekistan, I believe, Samarkand. But multiple kinds of calligraphy interlocking with each other. At some point you realize that kind of the main point here is not actually to be able to read the words, but to see the art of the words. And I have a page from the St. John's Bible on the right here that kind of does some of the same thing. It's the 10 Commandments. The words are really the centerpiece here, but it also kind of falls away. It's not entirely meant to be read. It's meant to be a work of art. So this is a very popular way of decorating manuscripts, is with elaborate calligraphy. Then there's geometric decoration, which is very popular on mosques, and this is very famous as an Islamic style. I think both on the left and right here, these mosques are both in Iran. And on the right, you can actually see some calligraphy as well under the dome. There's a band of calligraphy. It's a very interesting style that almost looks like pixelated. This was popular in Iran in the medieval period. But this is actually, it's very famous as an Islamic style, geometric decoration. The stars and the little pentagons and triangles and everything. It's not actually very common in manuscripts. It's more of a sort of physical object type of thing, a tile that's put together on the dome of a mosque or on the walls or the ceiling. But I did want to compare it to this, this page from the St. John's Bible with some geometric decoration. And there's some that's directly drawing on Islamic styles as well. But what is very popular is vegetation. So we have some manuscripts here that both have, this is actually the bottom left is the same one I showed you at the beginning. And then there's another one here on the right that both have just really beautiful floral designs kind of interlocking around the outside of the text. And this is also used in the St. John's Bible, of course, in the middle here. So in both cases, people are using kind of images of flowers and plants that are available around them, the local vegetation, local wildlife. So the St. John's Bible is actually milkweed with the monarch butterflies, but you've got a variety of flowers on numerous Islamic manuscripts. And then there's a lot of scientific diagrams as well. So for example, on the right here, there's a diagram of astronomy. So we've got some planets and moons moving around. On the left, there are some diagrams that help you measure land. And the idea is to measure how much land someone has for inheritance purposes. So that you can figure out how much needs to go to which child and that sort of thing. And then in the center, these little diagrams actually kind of look like little COVIDs to me, but they are actually kind of diagrams of poetic meters. So this is a text about how to write poetry in different meters with different number of syllables. So you've got like, circles for one kind of syllable and lines for another one. It's like ones and zeros almost. So those are very common depending on the type of manuscript, of course. Now, what about animals and humans? It depends. This is sometimes treated in a sort of reductionist way. People will say, oh, Islam doesn't allow images of humans or that sort of thing. But it actually depends on the context. So you do have, I would say, in my experience, there is quite a bit more use of this kind of imagery in like Persian texts rather than Arabic ones. But it's very important to remember that the Persian language and the Persian tradition was an incredibly important influence on Muslim cultures all the way from Southeast Europe to South Asia and Southeast Asia. So really the vast majority of Muslims historically and now are living in places that have been influenced by these Persian artistic heritage. So you've got images like the one on the right with kind of scenes from a poem. In the middle, you've got some angels with various types of heads. And then you've got some animal drawings on the left, an elephant actually giving birth to another elephant, and then a little cat. So it depends on which kind of culture, which culture you're talking about. It's not entirely absent in Arabic, but it is less common to have images of humans and animals. But it also depends on what kind of text it is. Texts that are really kind of the most like serious and religious and most closely tied to the meaning of the Quran are going to have less of this sort of imagery. But things like stories and poems and those sorts of things will often have illustrations like the one on the right here. And then there's books that are just about like the different kinds of animals or like the wonders of creation in a general sense. And so you'll have lots of pictures in those sorts of texts if they're able to afford it. It's important to note that it's just very expensive to produce manuscripts like this. And so that's one big reason why a lot of them don't have it, because people just needed the actual text and couldn't afford to do anything elaborate. But this does even include images of prophets. We've got the Prophet Muhammad on the right here, ascending into heaven and meeting Noah and Enoch from the book of Genesis. And then we've got the King Solomon on the left, also considered a prophet in Islam. And so they're often marked with these kinds of flaming halos to show that they're a prophet. And sometimes their faces are obscured or erased. Other times they're shown, like in these images. But really, this is it's disputed, but it's also just kind of, there's a big difference between a Muslim doing this respectfully in an artistic sense, and the way that they might react to a non-Muslim who does it in mockery or hostility, that sort of thing. So this is something that you do see in the manuscript tradition, although it's not extremely common and it's disputed, but it is something that's out there. But then I just want to show how diverse the styles can really be. We've got manuscript examples here from North Africa, from South Asia, from Egypt or Syria, probably Turkey, this one, West Africa, Yemen, Indonesia, Ethiopia. There's really just this incredible array of styles and colors, very, very bright colors that are used in some of these to ornament the text, and just this incredible diversity of styles. So there's really not just one Islamic style of manuscript, but there's a real complex tradition. Now, as for the text itself, here you see some manuscripts that are not really ornamented. And as I already said, this is the vast majority of them because it's just so expensive to produce something that has all of that decoration. But on the text itself, there's a pretty standard kind of way of writing a text. You've got the invocation, which is basically identical on almost any Islamic text. It's on almost every surah of the Quran. It's on almost every text. It's something that people say when they start to give a speech or a presentation. And it just says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, compassionate and merciful. I find that at the beginning of almost any text, almost any manuscript. And then there's usually the text starts with a praise to God, and prayers and blessings being asked for the Prophet Muhammad. So this little section is often very kind of elaborately written and really can be tied into what the text is and the themes and concepts of the text. So for example, this text that we're looking at right now is a book about metaphor, how metaphors work, how they work, how you can incorporate them into your writing. And so the beginning of the text here actually says, praise be to God, to whom praise is reality, but to anyone else, it's just a metaphor. Like, you can actually praise God like in reality, but you can't praise anyone else except metaphorically. So that's actually tied into what the author is going to talk about in this book. And then there's a transition to the introduction, which is more of a straightforward kind of, here's what this book is, here's why I wrote it. Often they'll say, oh, my friend asked me to write this thing and I'm not worthy of it, but I figured I'd give it a go. And then in this text is actually a commentary, which is very, very, very common. There's a huge commentary tradition, especially in later Islamic texts, and so you really can see exactly how each author is interacting with all of the people that came before them because of the way that they structure their commentary. So in this one, in many of them, you'll have kind of the text that they're writing about will be in red, or maybe it's just overlined or underlined. Then they explain what they think about it, and that'll be in the black text. And also, you can see how many marginal notes are on here. So this is a book that has been studied, written on over and over again. People have gone through it, written their comments. Sometimes those marginal comments then become a new commentary on the text that will be kind of repackaged into its own manuscripts. But really, you can just see the entire intellectual tradition happening here. You've got the the various levels of, different people kind of interacting with those who came before them. And then at the end of the text, you'll often have what's called a colophon. And that is basically where the scribe, the person who's actually writing it by hand, will say often the date, maybe their name. They'll often say, I'm just the poorest and most unworthy person, but here's, please pray for God's forgiveness for me, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of kind of humility formulas that go on. This is the name here, Omar bin Yusuf. But they might say where they wrote it. They might say something about what was going on at the time. Maybe I've seen some where they say, I wrote this when I was hiding out because there was a plague or something like that. So you've got all sorts of things like that that appear in the text. And then there's extra information that comes in various notes. You might have notes about who owned it, who, they'll write the date that they bought it, or someone who repaired it maybe might write a note about it. Or you might have historical events, like on the right here, the red text at the bottom is a note about a lunar eclipse that the person saw. So you've got all the things. You might have people writing notes about people in their families' birth dates or death dates. This is something you might see in like the family Bible in some places in America, that people would kind of keep these records just in like the margins and the fly leaves at the beginning of the text. So you've got all sorts of things here that are just like a wealth of information of things going back centuries of the various people who interacted with the book that you're looking at. And then just briefly, I want to say a word about Christian manuscripts in this context, because there's a rich tradition of that as well, and I've worked on many of those as well. So they're often in Arabic or Syriac or Coptic Christian manuscripts from the Middle East. So these are Syriac biblical manuscripts that you can see here. So there's clearly some ways that they interact with the Islamic styles, but they also have their own kind of artistic traditions. This is a Coptic, it's Coptic and Arabic parallel Gospel of Matthew. And so they have their own traditions, but then in Christian Arabic, you've got a variety of ways that people go about these. So the manuscript on the right here is someone who has just gone all out on producing a manuscript in the Islamic style. This is the full-on, typical style with the flowers. The invocation is exactly the Islamic one, in the name of God, compassionate and merciful. This could have even been copied by a Muslim scribe in a sort of workshop. It's hard to tell, but it's a commentary on the Psalms. So it's actually a Christian text, but it's done in the Islamic style. On the left, you've got something that's really taking a different direction. So sometimes the Christians will produce manuscripts that are more unique. So this one is actually a translation of Thomas Aquinas's Summa in Arabic, but you can see that the style is very different. The invocation at the top is a more common Christian one, which is Trinitarian. So it says, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, with God. So you'll see that where they're clearly taking on the idea that there should be something in the name of God at the beginning of this, but they want to make it distinctive. They want to make it Trinitarian so that it's clear that it's a Christian text. Christians will sometimes copy texts that were written by Muslims. So for example, this is a commentary by Averroes in Arabic, but it's written in Syriac letters, which is called Garshuni. And that's something that you see on a lot of Christian manuscripts, but it's really interesting and rare to see it on a text that's written by a Muslim. And then you just never know what you might find. These are all from a book of church law from the 19th century. So we've got like a full calligraphy page here on the left, picture of Jesus with the, calming the storm in the middle. The right is a table of contents that has a bunch of lions with mustaches. And then there's this little monk being carried away by a giant bird or something. So you never know what you might find in these manuscripts. But I want to just wrap up and say, first of all, this manuscripts continue to be produced in the Middle East long after they basically fell out of favor in the West. And so you have examples like this actually, where this is someone has hand copied part of a book about ancient Egypt that was printed in 1891, and they made it into a manuscript in 1913. So very, very late, you've got people that are still kind of keeping this tradition alive, and even hand copying out of printed books into manuscripts. So the printing and the manuscript culture really continue kind of in parallel in the Middle East in a way that they, and in other Islamic regions, in a way that they didn't so much in Western Europe, where printing really took over much earlier. And then just to wrap up, I want to say that there's just this incredible wealth of these manuscripts out there, and so many of them have been taken away from the Middle East and other Islamic areas by European and American scholars. And so the vast majority of them are actually now in major libraries in Western Europe or the United States. But one nice thing about the sort of digitization projects that are going on here and are happening more and more now is that we actually get to see what was left behind. So, for example, this is a Quran that's in Jerusalem still, and it's a beautiful text, and there's just many thousands of manuscripts out there that were not taken to Europe in the 19th century or 20th century, and so there's a lot out there to discover, and I'm excited to hear what all you have to say and what you think, and excited to talk about it with you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fascinating. A lot of things I know nothing about, so I'm glad to learn some new things. So we have a few questions. One from Susie Baker: was the early paper cotton rag paper?
Yeah, I believe that I believe that was pretty common. Yeah, I'm less of an expert on the materials, but I do think that it was mostly made out of some sort of rags. Cotton probably, yeah. But yeah, it was more rags and less like the sort of tree production that we're doing now.
And I had a question. I see gorgeous pictures of mosques, and yeah. And the designs in them look so smooth and beautiful that I always wonder exactly what they're made of. Are they all tile? Is some of it painted? It looks like the whole thing is enamel. And so do you know about that, and can you speak to that?
I think it's very common for it to be mostly tile. I'm sure there are some situations where parts of it are painted, but really the vast majority, as far as I understand, is tile. And the art of tile making is just incredible to me, because they have to know exactly how everything will fit together, and there's a lot of geometry that goes into it. And so yeah, there's a lot of, some of the manuscripts themselves are kind of like geometrical works that would be important for someone to understand, so that they can do this sort of tile production, because incredible. The calligraphy here, that I think is more painted. There's kind of just like too much of it going on to be most tile, but then you can see the geometric designs, I think, are mostly tiles.
Thank you. And then Wayne Ham has a question. To engage in calligraphy for the Quran, is there a preparatory religious rite that must be engaged in prior to writing? To write in a Torah, one must engage in a ritual bath. I'm not going to pronounce this right, mikveh, prior to writing?
That is a really interesting question. I think that I don't think there's anything on that level, like a bath or any sort of like major ritual like that. I think that there would be just sort of a basic prayer, or even just the classic invocation in the name of God, compassionate and merciful, and then you begin. Yeah, I am not aware of any kind of specific ritual to be done, although there are definitely plenty of texts that talk about how to write the Quran, and so it would be interesting to see if they have anything to say about something like that. But I didn't know that about the Jewish practice, which is really interesting. I definitely don't think there's anything on that level for Muslims.
And I was really curious about the angels with animal heads. Me, being very steeped in like Christian or Western art, that, the angels always have, beautiful heads, usually very feminine. And so can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And actually, so this middle image and also the left image here are both from a manuscript that I was just working on a couple of days ago, and it's one of these. It's just called The Wonders of Creation, and it's the full title is like The Wonders of Creation and the Strange Things That Exist. And so it covers all sorts of ground. There's all these illustrations of constellations and planets and angels and animals and plants. And it's just an incredible book that has just so many cool pictures in it. But there are a lot of angels, and the vast majority of them do have human heads. It's basically the sort of angel that you would expect. Actually, I think probably in this, like this on the right here, there's an angel with the wings. So very, very familiar. Also on the left, there's plenty of angels up at the top. They all have the wings, but they're basically like a human with wings. That's pretty common from Christian art as well. But these four angels in the middle here are called the bearers of the throne, and they're actually kind of like holding up the divine throne or the cosmos in some way. It's unclear exactly what they do, but what's really, really interesting to me is specifics of the four creatures that are here, because one at the bottom right is a human face, and then at the top right is a lion, top left is an eagle, and the bottom left is a bull. And these are actually the same exact four creatures that appear in the Bible in the books of Ezekiel and Revelation. That Ezekiel has this vision of these creatures around God's throne, and in Revelation there's also the same sorts of creatures that have eyes all over, and they're always singing God's praises around the throne. And then these four creatures become the symbols of the four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in Christian art. So you can see these same figures with the human and the lion, and the ox represents Luke, and the eagle is John. And so you can see them in churches all over the world. So this same set of four creatures made its way into the Islamic tradition, and it shows up in the angels that are depicted here. So it really kind of is an idea that's found in Judaism and Ezekiel, and in Christianity and Revelation, and then not in the Quran exactly, but in some of the Hadith, which are stories and things that are attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. There are places where he talks about these four angels, and so there are interpretations like that they represent all of creation, because it's like humans and domesticated animals like bulls, and wild animals like lions, and birds, kind of the creatures of the air, like eagles. And so there's a really interesting connection to Jewish and Christian tradition in that image. But yeah, it is definitely, I think in all three traditions, it's unusual to have angels that don't have human faces. So it's just this kind of particular set of 4 that appears like this.
Thank you. That was very interesting. And then the bakers have a great question. In the last manuscript you showed, it looked like a mix of Syriac and Arabic script. Is that correct? If so, why? Is one part commentary and the other text?
Are they talking, is it this manuscript? This must be the one they're talking about. And that's exactly right. That's a very good eye.
Right now, maybe everybody else is, oh, I can see it now. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was the last one with the blue border that I was specifically.
Oh, I see. Oh, this one. Well,
Okay.
this one is actually all Arabic script. It is different styles of handwriting. But the bigger, thicker, more square text is the Arabic text of the Quran. And then there's Persian translation written in between the lines in a more sort of small flowing text. But it's all Arabic script, it's just different styles. But on this image, it's Arabic script at the top, the first 4 lines, and then Syriac script going down to the bottom. The language is all Arabic, but the top is written in Arabic script and the bottom and the rest of it is written in Syriac script. And the particular reasons for those choices are kind of a mystery to me, but the bulk of this one is written in the Syriac script, which is called Garshuni, to write Arabic in Syriac script. So yeah, sometimes you do have, like I've seen one text where there's like text in Arabic script and then commentary on it in Garshuni. So it's in Syriac script. So you do have stuff like that. Usually it'll just be one or the other. But yeah, something like this was produced in a Muslim context. And so very, very few Muslims would know how to read Syriac script or write it. So it's really only in the Christian context that you get the Syriac. And so they can sometimes take more liberties because they know that Muslims won't be able to read it if it's in Syriac script. So for example, I was looking at a manuscript the other day that was a Muslim text, but written in Garshuni, so it's in Syriac script, and where in the introduction where the author had said prayers for Muhammad, the scribe actually replaced the name Muhammad with Moses, so that it would be more acceptable from a Christian perspective. And knowing that no Muslim would likely to ever read it, they figured that was probably fine. So instead of saying, prayers and blessings on the Prophet Muhammad, it says on the Prophet Moses, and it's, and all the other prophets and that sort of thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah, this one, you're definitely right. There's a number of different writing styles going on, but it's all kind of variations on the Arabic script.
Well, thank you. That was our last question. Although if anyone has any other ones at the last minute, you can throw them in. But the last comment was from Mallory Sharp, our curatorial assistant, who said, "Thank you. This was very interesting." And I agree with her. So thank you very much. And if you guys want to unmute and say a quick thank you and goodbye to Josh, feel free.
Thank you, John.
Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, thank you all for coming. It was really interesting and great questions. Really, really great questions.
Thanks so much. That was really cool.
Yeah, and feel free to contact me if you have more questions or.
Excuse me, Josh, where is the library that all this is stored in?
So our library is here in Minnesota, but most of what I had is digital images of manuscripts that we have photographed, and we have the photographs on our website, but the manuscripts themselves are still in the libraries that own them around the world. So many of them are from Jerusalem or Timbuktu, Mali. Some of them are in Vienna, Austria. So they're in a number of places, and just the photos are on our website. But we like that because it allows us to keep the manuscripts in the hands of the people that own them, and rather than having to take them to Europe or the United States.
All righty.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, but I want to say also in the chat, our curator, Julie Parati, she said that was so great. Thank you so much. We love having the Quran from your collection here in the show.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's great. I didn't realize there was one there as part of the show. That's really nice though.
What is the scene behind you?
What's that?
What is the scene? The picture behind you, the lake? What is
Oh, this is a national park in Minnesota that I visited a few months ago. It's just a nice, nice lake scene. It looks nicer than the wall behind me.
Okay, well, I'm gonna end the meeting,
Yeah.
everyone. Thank you so much for coming,
Sounds good.
Josh. Great job. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
All right, bye everybody.